All right, so here's the last of our hip popping series. And believe it or not, there's things that you do at home that have nothing to do with dance that actually make your hip popping worse. And one of them is the way that you stand. So it's really common because a lot of us have hyperextension in the knees to slam the knees backwards and to drop the pelvis forward. So the minute that you do that, you're now hanging on your bones and you're overstretching the front of the hip. So what we talked about at the beginning of this series, where you have that ball and socket and now you're kind of pushing that bone forward, you're overstretching it, it's the same thing in standing. And this is gonna help you stand better in your first position as well. So unlock the knees, and instead of this being overstretched, you wanna feel just a smidge of a bend there. So you're lifted and now you're working the muscles through the front of the hip to support the hips. So that's gonna be the same thing when you go to first position, that lift up out of the hips. If you only do it in class, it's not gonna happen. You gotta do it all the time. So don't hang on your joints and ligaments, lift up out of the hips, and that's gonna help. You also wanna be careful how you sleep, believe it or not. I actually treated a patient who had a torn labrum, and they did really, really well, but they always slept in a frog position, and then they stopped doing that, and they came back to see me, and they had gone back to sleeping in the frog position, and all of their symptoms came back. And that was mostly all that they changed. So when you're laying on if you're a stomach sleeper, which I don't recommend, but that's a whole other story, don't prop one leg up. A lot of times this is the popping hip, especially not the other one. If you have to be a stomach sleeper, get your leg down, or get partially on your side, put a pillow here so you're rolled on it, but your hip is in the socket and you're not stretching it all night, and that will help with some of that hip symptoms. Couple things with sitting. You wanna make sure when you're sitting that your hips are higher than your knees. If your knees are higher than your hips, like if I'm sitting low here, down here, now I'm jamming in the hip socket. So you're just compressing all of those tissues, the labrum and everything that can get irritated inside the hip. So you want to avoid this position. So get yourself on a chair. If you can't get on a chair that's better, then put your feet out farther, and that will drop the knees a little bit. And again, less compression in the hip. And last but not least, this is a nice position. Yes, it's easy for dancers, but you're overstretching your hip the whole time you do it, and you already do that in class all day. So if you're gonna sit in a chair the right way. Turn it around, turn yourself around, but don't spend a lot of time sitting with your legs all the way out into hip extra rotation. You don't need to do that. So I hope all these tips have helped you with some of the snapping hip issues, and look forward to some other tips on Achilles tendonitis.